Welcome very much, everyone, to the Australian launch of Hounded, Women, Harms and Gender Wars by the fabulous Jenny Lindsay, who is here with us. Welcome, Jenny.
Oh, thanks for having me.
An absolute pleasure and honour. Now, for those who don't know Jenny, I'll just really briefly introduce her and then we'll get on to talking about her book, and we'll ask her some curly questions, some of which will come from the audience. So Jenny Lindsay is a writer, poet, performer and essayist from Scotland. She has written poetry and prose for numerous publications and anthologies. Her debut non-fiction book, Hounded, Women, Harms and the Gender Wars, which we're here to celebrate tonight, was published by Polity in 2024 to high acclaim, charting the psychological, social, economic and democratic harms that are caused by the hounding of gender-critical feminists. It has been described as one of the most important political books ever to have been written about Scottish culture and politics by the Herald, and as one of the definitive chronicles of these times by author J.K. Rowling. So you can't get much better than that. So huge congratulations, Jenny, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much. It's always so awkward when you hear people say really nice things about you and you're like, but yeah, the reception for the book has been incredible, beyond what I could have hoped for. So yes, it's been really, really good.
Especially in Australia, there's been a really strong interest.
Yeah, there has. So it published in the UK in October, and I think it was January or February in Australia. But for some reason we managed to get quite a bit of sort of press interest from Australia. I was on the ABC Late Night Live. I also wrote a piece for The Australian, and there was another radio thing I did as well. So I think because there are obviously, although there are really very different sort of legal things going on between our two countries, foundationally it's exactly the same issues that a lot of women are facing on a foundational level, although the legal situation is very different. So
yes,
I think that's
so
why.
true. And also possibly because in Australia there's not many people willing to speak up. I think sometimes when you go to another country you feel more free to speak because you're not that you're muddying a pond, but you know what I mean. It does stir up sometimes a little bit of pushback and hate, and sometimes people are less likely to do that in their own country than in another country.
Well, what I've noticed actually is, and this is the case in Scotland, so there are very few places that will platform me in Scotland. But in England and Ireland, I've been to Jersey. Obviously, I'm speaking to you guys now, but also back in sort of 2016, 2017, the Canadian feminist Megan Murphy came over to Scotland and she got lots of press that women who live here were struggling to get. So I think it's something about the broadcasters and the institutions as well. They'll say, look, here's a woman from outside to talk to us, but they seem quite unwilling to platform people locally sometimes. So
interesting. You're more exotic and important if you come from the outside, possibly. Yeah. All right, so there's so much to discuss tonight, and I think that it would take us hours to even scratch the surface of this huge topic, because in the last 5 or 6 years you have found yourself embroiled in quite an extraordinary sort of series of events which pertain not only to you personally but to sort of a broader sweeping social change that's not just going across Scotland but across the Western world. So I wonder if, just to begin with, I'm sure most of our audience are familiar with you, but possibly if not, if you could give us sort of a brief background to how you, a poet who was doing, quite nicely, thank you very much, just doing your thing, in the Scottish art scene, how you found yourself, targeted, then hounded, then literally sort of driven out of town by what has happened to you with the transgender lobby, and also how you've made bloody hard-won comeback, actually, as the author of this incredible book.
I will try and be as brief as humanly possible. As you say, it's a huge, huge topic. So I would say that it really started for me in about 2013, to be honest with you. And I'd started noticing, I describe it as watching a set of ideas and ideologies start to scaffold around me, that I realised I did not agree with. and that you weren't allowed to not agree with it. So the set of ideas that were starting to scaffold were about gender identity, and that everybody has universally, every single human being has a gender identity, and that makes you either transgendered or cisgendered. So I was being told that I must call myself a cisgendered woman, and what that meant was that I identified with the gender I was assigned at birth. Now, I disagree with every single word in that sentence, but this was becoming a sort of mandatory set of ideas. And at the same time, in Scotland and across the UK, there was talk about reforming the Gender Recognition Act, which is what gives people who identify as transgender the ability to change their birth certificates and to be recognised legally as the opposite sex in law. And when that was brought in 2004, it was predicted it would be a very, very tiny number of people, very high-passing transsexuals. Transsexual is the language in the law, and that it wouldn't impact on everyone. Of course, there were dissenting voices at the time, but it wasn't. We didn't have massive conversations before this law came in. But anyway, so there was talk about reforming that act, which meant that, to me, obviously, there was a public consultation out about it. So I thought, well, people need to discuss this. But as I say, I started to notice what was happening to the women who were trying to discuss it, and what I was watching really disquieted me at first, and then genuinely frightened me, because what I was seeing was that these women who were organising meetings to discuss this, or were maybe just posting even mild comments on Facebook saying, oh, I don't think that that's a very sensible law because A, B, C, D, 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 you know, because there's a lot of consequences if we open up the ability to, you know, instantly sort of be able to change your legal sex, and what rights does that afford? And there was a lot of misinformation happening at the same time as people were told we weren't allowed to talk about it. And I started to hear this little insult, TERF. And that stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist. But I noticed that it did not take very much to get that label either. So I started noticing all of that sort of starting 2013, 2016 was my turning point when I became incredibly frightened. And that's when I sought out the company of others, as it were. I'd noticed a poet called Maggie Gibson posting about it on Facebook. And I thought, oh, well, I don't know Maggie very well, but I'm going to email her and say, listen, because I was very embroiled, as you say, like in this sort of bubble world of performance poetry and live literature, and everyone around me practically totally hated TERFs, and you know, it was trans women are women, trans women are, so there's all these sloganeerings, the mantras, so I sought out Maggie in 2016, but I didn't speak out 100% until 2019. And by that point I'd worked out what it was that these activists had an issue with, and I worked out that the thing that got you the label TERF and had people starting to hound you and try and get you fired was believing one or all three of three core beliefs. The first, that women are materially definable as a category of human being, i.e. we're adult human females. The second thing that would get you hounded is thinking that that has legislative and cultural importance. So on the basis of sex, believing that women should have protected rights. Now, both of those things are status quo positions that we all agreed with up until 5 minutes ago. So but these were the things that were getting women hounded and people sort of attacking them. And the third core belief is that I believed fundamentally, because I believe in democracy, I really want to live in a liberal democracy, I think it's very important, is that women should have unfettered freedom of speech and expression, particularly on matters that affect us profoundly. So 1, 2, 3 core beliefs, if you held any of them, activists would call you a TERF, try and get you fired, and they would set upon you psychologically. But I thought, well, you don't even need to agree with my beliefs in order to agree that houndings are wrong. So the moment I spoke out was when the violent activism arrived in Scotland, about 10 minutes from my flat. So a columnist for a local arts magazine had published a column justifying incitements to violence against lesbians at a Pride March. And this was published at the weekend of the beginning of June 2019. I saw it. I was in a very bad mood. I called it out on Twitter, very polite tweet. I was like, hello, one of your columnists is advocating violence against lesbians at Pride March. That's an extraordinary thing to read in this magazine. And my life changed overnight from that moment on. So just for opposing the violence, that made me a target. And what made it worse was that a few days after that column had been called out by me and many, many other women, I must say, that activist attempted to assault Julie Bindel, the feminist, outside the University of Edinburgh. And I sat and watched as poets and writers in my circle justified that violence against Julie, or minimised it, or somehow said that she deserved it because she was a TERF. Now remember, so what my book asks the reader to believe is, understand that women who get that label TERF, we have three very ordinary core beliefs. Women are real, we're important in life and in law, we shouldn't be facing violence for having meetings, and we should have open discussion. So if you're a woman with those beliefs, watching the activism and watching the minimisation of violence against women hits no differently from other types of misogyny and violence against women. And what has been missed in this entire conversation, I think, because as soon as women like me speak, everyone, broadcasters or whoever jump in with, oh, but what about trans women? What about it's like, no, my starting point has nothing to do with trans. It's to do with women are real, we're important in life and in law, and we shouldn't be facing violence. Now, there is a set of ideas about gender that we also disagree with, and that's what's got us the term gender critical, which I think is a misnomer because all feminists critique gender. So to the gender identity activists, gender is an identity, it's personal. It's not personal to me. Gender to me is a force that you navigate. And as a 43-year-old woman, the gendered forces that I have to navigate are very, very different to the ones that I navigated as a 17-year-old first getting on stages. So gender is not an identity. I think it's best summed up by Germaine Greer, actually, who said, I'm going to mangle this quote because I've just said I'm going to say
that quote.
Well,
I wrote it down.
Yeah, it's what is it? Oh, my cat has just knocked things off the table. It's sex. What is it? Female is real and it is sex. Femininity is unreal and it is gender. And for that to become the given identity of a woman is a profoundly disabling notion. So if you make gender an identity, and if you say, well, what makes me a woman is my relationship with gender, then that's really oppressive because gender is a punishment and it's a force, and you're damned if you do go along with gender roles and you're damned if you don't. That's the whole point, because gender is a hierarchy. Anyway, I'm probably getting too complicated anyway. So I started getting hounded, and the things that happened to me, I thought, said a great deal, not just about me, but about Scottish literary culture. And so I was approached to write a very long commission, 8,000-word long commission for the Dark Horse Literary Magazine in 2020. And that outlined everything that had happened to me. But it also, in the final third, posed a challenge to the Scottish literary world not to become a reflection of all of the cultural and political divisions in Scotland, and to become instead what artists are supposed to be, which is a powerful antidote to those kind of divisions. But instead, the making of these ideas mandatory and saying, if you oppose self-ID, then you're an evil bigot and we're going to ruin your life and we're going to target all your employers and we're going to hound you out of town. That's a disgrace. That's not, and the failures of the Scottish literary culture say a great deal about Scottish democracy. So that's what my essay was based on in 2020. Off the back of that, Polity got wind of this essay and approached me in 2023 to take it even further, I suppose, and go beyond my own hounding and look at all women's houndings. What's the exact pattern that's happening to every single woman? Some high-profile cases like Sal Grover, who you might have heard of, and women whose names you'll never hear, because this isn't just it's not all of us managed to get the headlines, but this is happening to people, to women in particular, in every industry. It's happening across the board. Activists are ruining women's lives. They are really, really going after women, and they're going after women for defending our rights and the language that we require to advocate for those rights. So it's a very, very serious problem. And one of the issues as well is because of all of the misinformation, our views have been completely misrepresented, for a start, and also a lot of the activists have. I'm afraid I'm not going to fudge my language here. They have brainwashed themselves to the point where even hearing a woman say women are adult human females causes genuine, I think, conniptions within them. They're like, no, you can't say that, you know. And this is Orwellian. This is Orwellian doublethink in practice. So yeah, I wrote my book. It's it's quite nippy. But the pattern of harms are psychological harms, social harms, economic harms, and democratic harms. And although, as I say, our cultures have their differences and our legal systems are different, the pattern of harms being experienced by any woman who gets that label TERF are identical. So that's as brief as I could even be about all of that, Michele. I'm sorry.
No, that was a wonderful overview. And what I really, because sometimes these terms are really slippery, and I think purposely so on the side of the trans lobby who want to sort of, you know, push boundaries. So what I really got from your book was that gender critical feminists aren't actually speaking about or trying to impinge trans people at all. They're just speaking about, as you said, those three core beliefs that women, you know, we exist as a sex, we are sex-based, you know, definition, we are adult human females, we are important. It's important that our rights, and specifically rights around safety and privacy and so forth, are legislated, and they have been, which has been hard won, you know, by suffragettes and so forth in the past. And number three, as you said, that you have the right to, women have the right, like anybody in a democratic society has the right to gather, to express their beliefs, and to, you know, within the bounds of the law, put forth their beliefs and so forth without being punished and penalised. So I loved the way that you made those three things really, really clear, because I think because things have been obfuscated, I can't say that word, muddied, I'll just say muddied, because they've been muddied, sometimes you get a little bit turned around when you see all this going on, especially on social media. Everyone's sort of slinging mud from both sides. So I found that incredibly helpful, those three core beliefs, and the fact that that's just about women, and they're not actually talking about trans people. So as you said, that's the status quo, that is what women have fought to achieve. And then another group of people have come in and they want to change the status quo. And that's not necessarily a negative thing, but it needs to be approached with a lot of openness, a lot of civility, proper discussion, and an understanding on both sides about, you know, with rights in democracy, we're always impinging. My right might impinge on your right. So there's always this juggle between the two. And so normally we go through this process socially, culturally, legally. And this just didn't happen in this case, under the guise of kind of being kind or doing the right thing or whatever, especially in the arts, where most people are, you know, very left-leaning. It kind of snuck in there, and no one really discussed it or thought it through properly until women started to say, well, actually, no, this is not working for us. This is not safe for us, and starting to push back. And then, of course, they became shut down by that term, you know, transphobia. So I was really impressed by the way you presented the case that these two sets of beliefs, you know, the gender ideology belief and you know, the gender critical feminist belief, they've butted up against each other. And this is not an unusual thing. This happens, you know, in democracy. But then what do we do? And we didn't do what we normally do. We didn't discuss it. We didn't think carefully before we legislated it. Around the world, it just kind of got passed, and then women had to kind of suck it up. And when they didn't, they started to be hounded and punished. So I thought that was really, really I just was so impressed by how clearly you put that, because sometimes you're searching for words and concepts, and it doesn't come to you as clearly as that. So thank you for that. It made it very, very clear for me. I was wondering if you could possibly outline, you've outlined the gender critical feminist beliefs with those three core beliefs really, really clearly. If you could outline what you see as the argument from the transgender side, where they say the idea of gender, because gender is such a slippery topic. Like, what is the belief there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the problems, and I do put this in the first chapter on core beliefs and their consequences, is that a lot of the ideas about gender appear to be incredibly contradictory from the other side. But at root, what it is a sort of, the way that it's presented is everyone has a felt sense of their own gender identity, and sometimes that will match the sex you were assigned at birth. They sometimes use the word gender. Again, this is a problem. The sex that you're assigned at birth, and sometimes it won't. And it is cruel and dehumanizing not to allow people to express themselves in their fullest, as an act of self-creation almost, as their gender identity. Now, this is muddying quite a lot of things that sound sort of reasonable on the surface, because most of us had got to the stage where we were like, yeah, men can wear dresses, women can be butch, like, what the hell, we don't care, and we still don't care. But this is sort of the sort of reification of gender as this kind of really sacred kind of internal force, and then you must go on a gender journey to find out your purest form of self-expression. It's very focused on the I, it's very focused on the self. And so, but that's seen as somehow, instead of viewing that as individualist, which to me it's just hyper individualist as an ideology, it's very focused on the self and doesn't sort of respect that we're all living in a society and must rub along with each other, and that there are consequences to one's actions. So, I mean, the other thing that I think, unfortunately, is inherent to the ideology, and this is still to be fully tested, I think, but is that anyone who doesn't reify that sense of self that you have, anyone who doesn't respect your identity, your wish and your desire to be viewed as if you are the opposite sex, is evil. And therefore houndings are completely justifiable. And I'm not being over the top here. I mean, when I look at, the response, for example, from people who are really not involved in this discussion whatsoever, when they hear about what's happened to me, which is one of the milder houndings, I would say, they're horrified. But people on the hounders who did this, who have gender identity beliefs, they honestly don't seem to see any problem with having written a big massive open letter saying I shouldn't be allowed to work, with the fact that I've been deplatformed from book festivals, with the fact that I can no longer work in schools. They see nothing wrong with this, because they're like, well, of course, she's evil. She's evil, and she won't reify the sense of self of these people who want her to. Which to me, of course, when those people are male, is the fullest expression of male power and repression that I've ever experienced in my life. So those are kind of the core beliefs. And unfortunately, for gender identity activists, I could respect, okay, you've got a sense of self about gender that I don't share, that's fine. That's cool, nothing to do with me really, if they hadn't pushed for all the legislative changes and if they weren't imposing on the rights of women. And because of the nature of the activism, which, as you say, you've got everything from the sort of full-on houndings of any woman or any female politician in particular who speaks out about this, but you've also got that sly sort of under the radar activism, which is getting all of the language changed. So taking out sex, putting in gender identity, and all of a sudden, voila, women's rights are gone. Feminism is made impossible because you don't have the language that you need to say women are female. And there's been a real bastardization of all of feminist language. You see a lot of the women who are involved in gender identity activism call themselves intersectional feminists. That's a bastardization of intersectional feminism, because what are the things intersecting with? Sex. It's not gender identity. You're not an intersectional feminist. So yeah, those are the set of beliefs, and they're very contradictory, because you hear about smashing the binary. Let's smash that gender binary, and then they reify it instead. Doesn't work. It's very
Yeah.
incoherent. So
Yeah,
yeah.
it's really interesting. I thought the way that this sort of goes into the sort of broad, the gender, the gender wars sort of feed into the, or under the umbrella of the general culture wars. And just the idea of, as you say, it comes in on the tail of gender as your identity, something innate inside you that you feel. And going back to that Germaine Greer quote, we used to see the idea of gender as in like gender conforming, like a woman has to, or a little girl has to wear this and do that, little boy has to. We used to see that as really regressive, right? We sort of got to a point where it's like, well, no, let the boy wear a dress, let the girl do this, whatever, don't put everyone in a box. And I think that was a lovely sweet spot that we got to. And strangely enough, for what calls itself a very progressive movement, this to me seems like a really regressive way of looking at gender and sex, because suddenly if you exhibit any kind of gender unconformity, then everyone wants to sort of say, well, you're in the wrong body, and especially with young people, it's another discussion we don't have time to get into, but
Yeah.
it's incredibly dangerous. Yeah.
What I would say as well is it's a very surface view of gender, because people might
Yes.
look at me and go, okay, she's got a flowery top on, she's got pink nails, and she clearly dyes her hair and needs her roots done. So they'll say, oh, well, you're very gender conforming. But actually, in my personality and what I do for a living, and the fact that I'm very outspoken against one of the most male-centric ideologies in the planet, that's very highly gender non-conforming, actually. I might look this way, but that's got nothing to do with how I live my life. So it's a very surface, very focused on the self. And it is very damaging, I would say, as well. To bring it back to my book, one of the sort of psychological harms in all of this is that we're having to refight battles that our foremothers won for us. And and at the same time, we're being told that we're evil for doing so. So that if you hold the, because I'm very aware there might be folk in the audience who do not share my beliefs whatsoever, but if you hold my core beliefs that women are definable, we're important in life and law, and we should not be facing curbs to our freedom of speech and freedom of assembly on matters that affect us, the last 15 years, in particular the last 6 for me since I started getting hounded, it has felt like living in a weird dystopian novel. Like, it genuinely has. That is a genuine feeling of living in this. At least a third of my life feels like I live it in this very crazy kind of regressive dystopia. And it's very discombobulating feeling.
Yes, I was thinking about that as well. It's that postmodernism, because I feel like this is sort of under the umbrella of that kind of critical social justice movement, and that sort of postmodern idea of truth being constructed, and that we're in this grid of power and oppression, and seeing things through that lens. And so I was thinking about, somehow gender, which used to be a sort of a vaguer term, has become real, and woman, which used to be a solid, biologically identifiable, category, has become a social category which you can opt in and out of. So it's like this complete sort of turnabout of reality. We're sort of in the underworld. So that to me is really fascinating, and also the way that it has, as you say, it's infiltrated the art, especially if you're a writer, because that bastardization and that muddying of language is both fascinating and very, very frightening. So I've found it. I didn't become aware of all this. So you've become aware of, as you said, quite some years ago. I was in 2020 when I sort of went through a cancellation and so forth, and I became aware of this idea of woke, and then sort of investigated this whole sort of this whole critical social justice movement and that worldview, and that was a real surprise to me. I mean, I was a little bit behind. I think Australia's generally a little bit behind in terms of that movement, which is lucky actually, but it has definitely got here. It got here now, and there's, as you say, it's like a scaffolding that's been built up around Western culture, which we don't really notice it's being built up until we look around and go, oh, it's changed something quite significant, and it becomes a little bit a little bit frightening. So I was wondering if we could get onto maybe an example in your book that is to do with the arts, because that's, you know, I know that's your pond that you swim in. That's my pond that I swim in. And I was, you know, all the examples of women who've been hounded in the book are incredible. But one that I was really interested in, because, you know, I follow her a lot on social media and so on, is the example of Rosie Kay, the dancer who tried to put on the you know, her dance interpretation of Orlando, and she was told that it had to be a bi or transgender person playing that role. And then she came a cropper of all the young sort of gender activists in her dance troupe. Could you tell us a little bit about Rosie?
Yeah, Rosie's actually, she's become a firm friend of mine through all of this, I must say. And that's one of the only joyful things about getting hounded, is you meet all these amazing women. So Rosie is someone I admire more than I can say. But yes, so Rosie Kay was at the very top of her field as a dancer and a choreographer. She had her own company, which was, I believe it was an RFO, which is a regularly funded organisation. She'd worked incredibly hard. She'd done some amazing things like the choreography for the film Sunshine on Leith, the opening of the Commonwealth Games ceremony. I think I'm right in saying that. I'll correct myself correct myself later if somebody finds out. But anyway, she was at the top of her game in a field, dance, which obviously, much like poetry, actually does rely quite a lot on things like funding and public subsidies and obviously networks, touring networks and all of that kind of thing. And like me, you know, she'd been watching this ideology rumble towards her and the houndings. And like me, actually, as well, she was like, oh, Jesus, this is going to get me one day. And sure enough, it did get her. And what was really frightening about Rosie's situation was that she had a dinner party for her dancers, because she didn't feel they were bonding as well as they might, because of COVID restrictions. You know, dance is very physical, and you know there was all these rules about not being able to sort of mingle and all the rest of it. So she organises this dinner in her own home, in her garden, for all these dancers. And as you say, alcohol had been consumed. The gender stuff comes up, as it always does, and she found herself at this subject to complaints to her board, and basically her board of her own company threw her under the bus. And what Rosie has had to do over the last few years is rebuild from scratch a career that she had already secured. And she's having to do that, as all hounded women are, with an extra layer of hostility and difficulty. That is so wrong, because it's nothing to do with her practice as a dancer. It's nothing to do with her talents as a choreographer. It's to do with unrelated views about gender that are perfectly legal, that has been confirmed by the Maya Forstater bill, and B, are legally correct, which was just confirmed by the Supreme Court. So Rosie, what she has faced in the arts is extraordinary. She's also set up an organisation called Freedom in the Arts, which is working worldwide. That cat is going to do something bad, I can just tell. Actually, stop it. And yeah, she's become an outspoken sort of critic about the situation in the arts as well, because it's happening in all art forms. And the art forms that are particularly precarious are the ones that are a bit more publicly subsidized, like poetry, like, you know, live literature. I know that from personal experience, like dance, like theatre. And that's why a lot of artists live in total fear of ever getting hounded, because they know their career's over. Whereas to people like Rosie, people like me, people like yourself, I'm sure as well, our response is, well, this is bullshit. There's no point in being a writer or a poet or an artist or a theatre maker or a choreographer if you don't have freedom of expression. There's no point.
Yeah.
If you don't have that burning desire to create, then go and do something else. But if you do, don't curb your freedom of expression and find other ways to do things. It's difficult, of course, I'm not going to take away from that, but you know, if you're a true writer and a true artist, that's what you're going to do. And Rosie is one of the truest artists I've ever met. She's so passionate, she's so talented. And what you'll see with Rosie Kay, and I think it was in relation to her that this quote was written, I interviewed the young feminist and artist and writer Nicole Jones, and she said that you know, cancel culture against women in the arts over this issue is an attack on competency. if you look at the artists that they're going for, I mean, I'm not going to use myself as an example here, but if you look at the artistic women who've been cancelled, Rosie Kay, top of her field in dance, internationally renowned, absolutely brilliant, cancelled by young dancers and non-artists on her board.
Mm.
Jess Duvall's, who's a little patch I've got on today, the embroidery artist, is absolutely exceptional. Cancelled by people who, I'm afraid, I mean, I'm not an embroidery artist, but looking at what they put out on Instagram, people far less talented than her.
Yeah.
The poet Maggie Gibson, in her 70s, really admired in Scotland, one of the best poetry educators I have ever met, cancelled by idiots. And I can call them idiots because I've met them. So it is an attack on competent, outspoken, talented women.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it
yeah.
definitely, it's like this cancellation machine just kicks in, and it is quite gendered, isn't it? Often it more than often than not, it goes for women, not always, but more often than not. And it's powered by women as well. It seems like, I think because social media is such a tool now of cancellation, that there seems to be a very sort of toxic feminine role, mode of engagement, I think, whereas sometimes men will, not always, but often do say things outright, or, confront each other. And, whereas women will sometimes go more for the reputational takedown. We have different ways of engaging. And sometimes I think that women have become more targeted.
Yeah, there's a viciousness to some of the sort of female hounders that I've had, but there's also been people who probably don't consider themselves as hounders who've been propping that up, and they don't recognise that they actually technically then fall into the hounding category. So that's the type of women who, for example, have put out statements since the Supreme Court ruling saying, I just want to say, trans people, you're all safe with me, and oh, I'm so sorry about the Supreme Court ruling, and isn't it bad, and isn't it evil? Oh, I just want everyone to be kind. And I'm like, you think that you're being nice by doing that, but what you're doing is saying, A, that women like me want to make those people unsafe, and that is not what we want to do. You're bringing in this level of sort of, yes, this sort of feminine, caring, nurturing energy, and you're directing it not to your fellow women who have just bust a bloody gut trying to get our rights clarified in law. You're bringing in all of that care and all of that nurture to men who are asking you to say that they're women.
Yeah.
What is wrong with you?
Yeah, no, I experienced that as well. Yeah.
I don't want to. Sorry, can I clarify? Because I know that I know that everyone's at different stages with this. I'm not lacking in sympathy for people who seem to think that their rights have been taken away, but the fact is they haven't been taken away. All of the discrimination protections are still there for anyone who's trans-identified, and I'm afraid there are very, very different reasons for someone to be trans-identified depending on whether they're a 14-year-old girl going through puberty or a 54-year-old man who has fathered children. This is not a coherent group with the same needs and rights. And that has been lost in all of this too. And what you'll notice is, the focus on trans women from the activist groups is so much higher than the focus on those who identify as trans men or those who identify as non-binary. And there's a reason for that. It's because this is a male-centric set of ideas about what a woman is. So it's fun, and it follows the pattern of a lot of male domination that we experience both in the public and the private sphere. And that's something that I explore a lot in the psychological harms chapter, because there's a woman called Lara that I interviewed for the book. That's not her real name. And she was married to a man who then transitioned, and he was exceptionally abusive. And Lara lives in Scotland, and she's had to watch as her entire country, including the Scottish government, centre the needs and desires of a group that includes her abusive husband, and she's the one who's been told that she's evil. This is psychological torture for women like Lara, and for a lot of us, but at least for women like me, we can maybe shut it off a bit. Lara can't. She can't.
Yeah.
And this
Yeah.
is top down from state level, psychological abuse, emotional coercion, coercive tactics of do what we tell you or we will harm ourselves, or if you don't do what we do, children are going to harm themselves. I mean, the levels of psychological abuse that is involved here is really, I don't want to underestimate it. It's huge. And people are
Yeah,
they're just not understanding
I
that the
agree.
reason for women like me being so fiery about this is it reminds us of the abuse we've had from men in the past.
Mm.
It's no different.
Yeah, the whole
Yeah.
thing's incredibly dysfunctional and manipulative, and I agree, Jenny. Like a lot of the people who are supporting it are doing it because they feel that's kind and it's the right thing to do, and so forth and so on.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that that's a sort of something that's happening across the whole sort of gamut of the culture wars. But I think probably most viciously in the sphere of gender at the moment. Absolutely, there's so much bullying going on. All righty. Well, I was thinking about the way your third core principle, that you can't that people have the right to, women in this time, this context specifically, but just generally, we as people have the right to gather, freedom of association, to discuss things and so forth without being shut down. Without being punished and penalised through cancellation and bullying and so forth. This is something that is no longer being upheld in the arts in particular, across lots of different gamuts. So I was thinking about the way, transphobe is used to shut down, discussion about, this balancing of the rights of women and the desires of the transgender lobby, and the way, for example, a term like Islamophobia is used to stop critical conversations about any aspect of that ideology that may be problematic. And in other sort of critical social justice movements, you can be called a racist to shut you up if you're trying to bring attention to something like BLM, which in the end was proved to be, quite corrupt in many ways. So it's something in the arts that has become sort of ubiquitous, and it has in Australia anyway. So I wanted to ask how it's going in Scotland and the UK in general, because I know in Australia, artists are generally very progressive. They want, they want social progress. They're all for that, and they're all for everyone being, being themselves and being accepted. But in a sense, this manipulation of language and this kind of weaponization of this toxic sort of compassion and empathy, the be kind sort of thing has made everyone withdraw into themselves, and we can no longer sort of, in Australia, I don't feel as much, express ourselves or create in the way we want to create for fear of this shutting down, which is, it's a form of that sort of threat hangs over you, and people start to self-censor, which can lead to very boring art and a very it's not a very cohesive or really inclusive in terms of diversity of opinion art scene. So that's definitely the way it feels in a lot of Australia. I'm wondering how it is for you in the UK.
It's exactly the same, but there are culture specific sort of differences. So there are different issues that are going to be more sort of febrile in Australia than they are in Scotland. But the universal thing that we're all facing is a sort of combination of sort of trying to use the present to address historical wrongs, and if you don't, you're evil. That is kind of happening on a whole load of different issues, not just race, but on the gender identity activists will bring up trans people have already always existed and you're being evil, not letting so it's trying to correct the wrongs of the past in the present and punishing people who have nothing to do with the past. And there's also no pretense at making artistic work that is going to speak to a universal human condition. If you focus incessantly on just what makes you as an individual who belongs to one specific group, I mean, you might manage to make some good art, but it's not going to speak to a sort of a wide. As writers and poets and artists, we got to be dealing with the universal, even when we're talking about personal issues. You know, you've got to be tapping into love and loss and pain and rage and things that can unite and not just divide. And as I say, you know, the Scottish literary world has been a reflection of the divisions in our politics rather than an antidote to it. And in Scotland, a lot of that probably did start around the referendum campaign for Scottish independence. And a lot of these identity-based issues latched onto the post-independence continued push for independence. So that's something that obviously you'll have read in the Democratic Harms chapter. But with the arts, yeah, it's I mean, we're in a really bad way, a really, really bad way, because I think the institutions, I mean, individual artists is one thing, but my full cancellation would not have been possible without the cowardice of artistic and literary institutions. And that's the problem. That's where I focused my problem on. You know, okay, poets and writers, they can hate me, they can call me a TERF, whatever. But if book festivals stop hiring me, if the educational poetry charities stop hiring me to go in and do all of my brilliant schools work that I used to make a living out of, then that's the thing that means I cease to exist as a creator. It's the institutions who are at fault. But unfortunately, it only takes one activist in one of these institutions to really change everything, bring in stupid codes of conduct that make no sense.
There could be one or two people complaining out of thousands, and yet, you know, I think it's getting less so that people will cower. But I mean, I'm thinking of the height of this 2020 to sort of 22. It took one or two complaints, and huge institutions would cower and roll over and make you know, make apologies and so forth. So I love this quote from your book. I say, if corrupted by homogeneity, mandatory beliefs, and compelled speech, the arts, which are supposed to be the realms of creativity, complexity, and ideas, become dull at best and at worst extremely frightening. I thought that was beautiful and put it in a nutshell. And I was wondering really specifically on your ideas on the role of arts administrators in that, because that's what I was honing on as well. Different institutions will cave, but in particular, we know with the arts, I mean, in Australia, you know, there's been a lot of sort of DEI sort of policies and sort of positive discrimination policies, which, you know, you can have debates for or against that. But what it has meant is that funding opportunities, prizes, and publications, people know that if they emphasize this and not that, they're more likely to go forward. And I think that's opened the door for some bad faith players to come in and start to sort of manipulate that system.
Well, arts administrators play a huge role in the artistic cancellations because, as I say, you know, when your hounding is backed up by institutions and artistic policymakers, then that's what ends a career. That's So, but the arts, I actually wrote a piece about this recently for the Irish Pages, which I might put out in Substack if they let me. And what's happened is a lot of arts administrators don't view their role as to enable individual artists to just, I mean, all of us want the same thing. We want someone to come along, give us 20 grand and say, go and write stuff, you know, all of us just want that. And we have to fill in these bloody funding applications saying, oh, I'm going to do this. When actually all you want is a big lot of dosh so you can afford pens, cat food and some pizza now and again, and you want to write and you want to create and blah, blah, blah. That's all we actually want. But arts administrators see their role as a social function, sort of social engineering, or a sort of activist function. And, you know, there might be a place for some of that, but what it means is that writers and artists themselves then start to try and like fit those funding criteria, which are nothing to do with creating good work at all. It's all about, oh, this poetry book will solve the climate crisis. I'm not sure how, but it will. Yes, I'm very, very green. Give me some money. It doesn't make any sense. It's non-artistic principles have come to dominate the arts world, and it needs scrapped. And that's not because I want to throw all DEI out of the window. I mean, for goodness sake, it's because in the arts, if those initiatives are not underpinned by freedom of expression and freedom to create, then they don't work in the artistic sense, you know. So there's been a sort of brushing away of what the role of the arts is in a democracy. It's to challenge,
Yes,
you
yes,
know.
yeah. I couldn't agree more. I really miss that because I'm old enough to remember the time when that was the norm, right? You know, went to uni during late 80s, early 90s, and that was fabulous. We all got to debate, and we played the ball, not the
Yeah,
man, you know, and then we all went and laughed and had a drink afterwards, and you were friends with people from all political persuasions. And it's so different now, and I really would love to try and, as much as possible, sort of advocate for going back
yeah,
to that way of doing things, but
yeah.
I don't feel it's gonna happen on its own. But I loved you had a beautiful quote. Hang on, where is it? Maybe I'll read it at the end. That'll be a nice one to go out on. But I just wanted to finish before we ask the audience for a few questions. The silver lining of houndings, as you said, is that you get a new network of friends. So you sort of go through this horrible dark night of the soul, and you think
Yeah.
everybody hates you and you hate yourself sometimes and so forth. You come through that. It's very psychologically damaging as well, of course, professionally and everything else. It takes a long time to rebuild, and I'm sure you're still rebuilding. It's not ever done.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. But then you do, one of the silver linings is you do get this lovely group of new people around you, the ones who come towards you rather than away from you during that time. And then that's like gold, you know, you hold on to those people. And so I was one of those people, of course, who's been such a supporter of gender critical feminists is J.K. Rowling herself. And I was really, when we were having a little discussion a week or two ago before this, you know, preparation for this Zoom, and we were chit-chatting away and it was all lovely. And then I got on Twitter and I'm scrolling through, and there you are having a little chit-chat to JK, and she's offering you a beautiful Chanel tote. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm 1 degree of separation from JK. You know, I was so impressed. I was wondering if you could show us the tote just to go.
Yeah, I will. I'll give a little bit of context for people who don't know where this came from, but this
Yeah,
is
thank you.
the tote. It is the most well-made thing I've ever seen in my entire life. I will not be doing my supermarket shop with it. But so what it was I was on Twitter and I was joking. I was making it, I almost deleted the tweet because I thought, oh, does that sound a bit petty? I was making a joke that, oh, you know, the thing that I miss the most about being booked for literary festivals is that you would always get a tote bag, and sometimes it had a wee notebook in it and a pen and and then the journalist Alex Massey underneath was like, he said, you've not been booked for any book festivals in Scotland. Scotland has like hundreds of book festivals. And I was like, no, not a one. And he was like, that's absolutely disgraceful. But then JK comes in, she's like, I feel like buying, I think she said, I feel like I'm in the mood to buy another turf a bag. And with a link to Christian Dior's website. And I was like,
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
So yes, that was lovely and very generous of her. It didn't come out of nowhere. J.K. Rowling and I are also in an anthology together, which is called The Women Who Wouldn't Wished, which was published by Constable
Yes,
last year as
wonderful.
well.
Yeah,
So she's kind of
yeah.
aware of my story and
Yeah, and
everything.
also
So
that was in the wake of the UK Supreme Court ruling, you know, that women were, you know, women. And so that was part of that lovely sort of celebratory moment, which I know also then had a downside, of course, of extra houndings on the top of that. But that was lovely.
the backlash,
I'm
the
sure.
backlash has been absolutely disgusting, I have
Yeah,
to say.
I'll
So
bet.
yeah.
Yeah. All righty. Well, we
Cool.
might now go to some audience questions. So I've got a few questions that were already sent in via email. So I'll read those first. And then if anyone wants to put questions in the chat for Jenny, then we'll try and get to those too. So, okay. Okay, let's start with this one from Susan Hawthorne, who we just published incredible shout out to Susan for her fabulous article that she put into Verity, which was all about the hounding of lesbians by the trans lobbies. So what was your toughest moment in this battle?
On a personal level rather than a political level, it was 2019, which was between my initial tweet defending women and opposing violence against women, and February 2020, which is when my hounding went totally public and was getting covered in the newspapers. The darkest moment for me was those final months of 2019 when I could not see a way out of this at all. I was losing money. I had no work at all. I was also dumped 4 weeks into my hounding for unrelated reasons. So I was dealing with that as well. And it was the darkest it's the darkest time I have ever. I would not wish that feeling on my worst enemy. So that was actually the worst point for me, was before my hounding went public. There was a relief in it going public so I could say, look at what's happening. So that was the worst personal point.
Yeah. Okay, so from Fiona Michele, because there's such institutional capture globally, despite the Supreme Court legal confirmation, any forward momentum feels constantly thwarted. Instead, it's more like Kafka's trial or being condemned to Wonderland. Do you think there will ever be a time of release from this corporatized chaos? And then in parentheses, but huge thanks for your vital resilience and commitment to pushing back.
Yeah, no, I think one thing that gives me a lot of hope actually is that there's still a very sizable part of the population who haven't realised what's going on. I mean, the exhausting part, to answer Fiona's question, is I don't know if there's. I think some of our institutions are beyond saving at this point, and I think I'm afraid some of the Scottish literary institutions are beyond redemption now, and I've only come to that conclusion in the last few weeks, seeing how they've responded to the Supreme Court judgment. Some of the theatres in particular actually putting out statements opposing the Supreme Court, which is Trumpian in the extreme, and saying that they're going to continue breaking the law and denigrating women. Now they need to stop getting public funding, I'm afraid, and we need to build new things again. It's exhausting, but we have to build new things. And I have to say, that is the silver lining in all of this. Oh my God, do women build better things when we come together and we try. Look at For Women Scotland, who started out as this scrappy bunch, in someone's living room, and they end up at the Supreme Court. That's incredible. What incredible women, So
absolutely.
That's the thing that keeps me going. Yeah.
Absolutely. Susan's just jumped back. Susan, Jenny answered your question. You'll have to listen to the recording now to get the answer. So we've got another one from Abigail Otley. What one thing can all those who are not being hounded do to support those who are? That's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, I know it sounds really brazen, but to be honest with you, I mean, the writers and the artists, because you and I wanted to focus in on that, we're all skint and the institutions aren't paying us. So Rosie Kay, obviously, she is doing her dance tour, so buy tickets to go and see Rosie's shows. Lots of us have set up, because we're kind of ostracized from sort of bigger publishers and all the rest of it. A lot of us are on Substack now. So in the immediate term, stuff like just amplifying an artist's work is really the best way that you can show support. But in terms of psychological support, I know I always really appreciated when just a total stranger would just send me a wee email and say, just wanted to say, I'm in Germany, your hounding's a disgrace. So that sometimes helps too. Maybe not too many, because then you sort of feel like, oh no, I'm not replying to everyone. But yeah, just continuing to show support for cancelled artists is so important.
Yeah, and I think especially in that moment of the cancellation, like from my own experience as well, like public support, like I'm sure probably similar to yourself, Jenny, you get a lot of private messages from people offering support, but very few people are willing to give public support. And listen, I do understand that as well, because people have to be in a position, it could be that someone risks losing a job, if they give public support. So no shade on people who aren't able to, but if you are in a position to say something publicly, I think that's really vital, because houndings are a pack, because the beautiful, the image of the fox, that is exactly it. It is a pack mentality. They get you off on your own, and then it's a pack after you. So even if you just have a little pack of your own, even if it's just 3 or 4 people, it gives you that psychological strength. And
I will say, if you are, for example, this has happened to me, I'll try and make sure that they're not identifiable. But if you are an incredibly wealthy person who works in the same industry as the cancelled woman, don't message her and say, I wish I could afford to speak out. Because I bloody couldn't afford to speak out.
Yes.
I was a skint freelance poet, and what you're doing with that is you're saying that somehow I could afford to speak out. I could not afford to speak out.
Yeah.
So it's fine to not say anything publicly. That is totally fine, but just watch for that particular phrase. It drives all of us up the wall.
Good one. Yes, I take your point there. All right, we've got one from Ali, beautiful Ali Whiteluck. What has struck me as strange is we often see gender activists calling openly on the news and on socials for violence against women, and yet I've never seen any women calling for violence or cancellation of any trans people. This is probably more of a statement than a question, but I would love to know what Jenny thinks about this.
Yeah, I mean, there's a phrase in Perth Island in the UK, which I think was coined by Helen Joyce, which is Operation Let Them Speak. We want our Hounders platformed. We want people to hear what their position is, but we also want the same for us. That's where the problem has been. I have gone 6 years. I've named 2 or 3 of them now because they became high profile. I didn't name any of my Hounders because they were all in the same industry as me, and they might not care about my livelihood, but I care about having a healthy literary ecology, as it were, where the thing that gets you bookings and publishers is your talent, not whether or not you are a hounder or whatever. That I've never been afforded the same respect, I will say, and Ali is quite right to point out the disparity. No gender critical feminist has ever tried to get, a gender identity activist fired or started open letter campaigns against them that totally misrepresent their views. It's just not comparable. So the both sides are as bad as each other thing is a total lie.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. All right. We've got another one from Yvette Henry Holt, who's another fabulous Australian poet. Bit of a statement to start with. I watched the Supreme Court's decision on the ruling of defining for the benefit of those who don't know, the ruling terms on what defines a woman does remind me of the exquisite, in hindsight, from Helen Keller, quote, women have discovered that they cannot rely on men's chivalry to give them justice. I think, yeah, that's quite true, quite the understatement. She goes on to say, one more thing, in one word, could you give me an adjective that leaps to mind regarding your former minister, Nicola Sturgeon? I promise I will agree with the first word that comes to mind, Scotland's #1 fan of female literature, Yvette.
The first word is arsehole, but I don't know if that's particularly eloquent. Yeah, no, I'm contemptuous of Nicola Sturgeon, and I always try to be as fair as I possibly can, but I'm contemptuous of her because even in the face of undeniable evidence, she continues to double down and say, there's nothing to see here, women aren't valid. Hang on, I've got one thing I want to do, which is hopefully as entertaining for you guys as it was for me to receive it. So again, on Twitter, I made a little joke that I wanted to get Lord Hodges' announcement as a daily alarm call.
The unanimous decision of this court is that the terms sex in the Equality Act 2010 refer to a biological woman and biological sex.
I just play that when I feel sad because it's just great. It's so clear, wonderful. And then his entire judgment was just amazing. Yeah, that was a really good moment for us in the UK.
Oh, thank you so much, Jenny. Well, I think we've come to the end of our questions. Yes, I think we have. So I just wanted to ask if you might finish by reading us something, possibly a poem, because I've never heard you read a poem.
Yeah. So is Ali Whitelock still there?
She is. I can see her. Yes.
She is. So Ali, I'm stuck between two. And you're aware of my poetry. So I was either thinking about doing the schism ring or this script. Putting you on the spot because you might not remember them.
I'm just
what do you think?
Myself, I think this script definitely is my favourite.
Okay, I will go for this script. Thanks for picking the really difficult one. That's great. Actually, this poem has its roots in a project that was in Australia, actually, in 2017. But I'll tell you about that another time. So this poem is called This Script, and it was written in 2017. So I was already having seen all the scaffolding going up around me, but as a poet, I didn't want to use my poetry to, you know, be an activist or a propagandist or whatever. So I was looking around at all these sort of restrictive gender sort of issues that were scaffolding, and I was like, God, I really need to write about this, but how without getting hounded and without getting cancelled? And I came across this form of poetry called univocal poetry, where you limit yourself to using only one vowel in the entire poem. So this script only uses the vowel I. And I thought, well, I'm trying to write about really restrictive gendered scripts. What better form to use than univocal? And it became the title poem of my final poetry show, This Script, which was me navigating these very choppy waters without 100% saying, hello, I'm a TERF. You recognise the sort of mild turfery in this now that you all know me, but this was me trying to address it in my poetry before I addressed it head on. So this is a part univocal poem in and about I. And before you get all funny with me, it does break the rules on purpose. So this script. Since 6, it imprints in skin. This girl script, this birthright which kills spirit. Whilst timid lips twitch, shh, girl, swirl mildly within this. Eyes itch in this skin, in this script. Misfits, spit, kill this, whip nitwit stingingly with livid rifts. This script stinks. It is shirt lifts, its skirt shims with impish grins. It is slits pink bikini tits, its pricks infringing with victim scripts. It is in birth till infirm, this script, this girlish mimicry. Grim risk if girls wish trim bits within nicks, if thigh ripping thick skins and big biff shirt spits binding within rigid distinct ticks ID and with scriptish wish list is inspiring. It binds I within slim picking, piddling limits. Misfits, flick digits, fists twitch, indignity fizzing, sighs rising. Because I, girl, is it implicit? Is it ID? This insipid script, is it simply right? Writ in birth, identity, cis? Is this misprint? Kick it, stick it in bins brimming with skin flicks, high five, other eyes, let a collective eye light up within winning shin kickings. Bitches, reclaim this script, be singing one is not born, one becomes one. Oops, off script. Because it's illicit thinking, skirting kinship with siblings, whilst hissing indignity within isms, splits ID from eyes, schisms rip, twittering vigils, timid girls, flit signs, skirmish, irk, pitching in as visibility, crisis rid, shh, shh. Kick it. This script, it's I ridden. I is limiting. I is I first. Tight knit wiring gives wind chill. We are not this script. Though we act it well and with vim, I stand still, individual, while a collective head ricks necks to listen. That's the script.
That was brilliant, Jenny. Oh my gosh. You see, now I'm very angry that you have not angry, but I'm angry with the gender activists who have taken you from your poetry and dragged you into this fight, because you're incredibly talented. And
I so tried to just address it creatively.
Yes.
And because I got hounded, I had to address it head on in prose. So they've only got themselves to bloody blame.
I completely agree. Well, thank you so much. And I'd love to end with a call to arms, so a quote from your own book. So you say, which I found very powerful and inspiring, I plan to continue writing and speaking as if I live in the liberal democracy that I have always been grateful for. The surest way to lose it is to act as if it has already been lost. I thought that was brilliant, and that is what we need to do, because in reality, although legislatively, rights have been eroded, especially in terms of, gender and sex, by and large, we still live in a democracy. We still have our rights, and many of us are giving away especially our third principal rights to speak, to gather, and so forth. We are, in some cases, giving them away because we're too scared to stand up for them. So I would love to end on that call for everyone to do as you say, to continue writing and speaking as if you live in the liberal democracy that you have always been grateful for, because we do not want to lose it. And the surest way to do that is to act as if it has already been lost, which it has not been. So thank you so much, Jenny, for reminding us of that, and for your incredible presence here tonight, for your bravery. And I really urge everyone to please, if you haven't already, go and buy Jenny's books. So you can get it on Booktopia, Amazon, everywhere, and it's an incredible read.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for all the great questions as well.
Oh.